Hello friends, this is Darkscream, and today I felt like just doing a talky video. So feel free to slap this one on the second screen. We're not going to be as visually fancy. I just wanted to talk about the bosses of Aberrus. We're sort of at the end of the tier now. I think everyone at every level of difficulty has faced the bosses they're going to face. We've all had the experiences we're going to have, and I wanted to offer my perspective because I really liked Aberrus. I liked a lot about Aberrus. And it's interesting seeing out there the other ratings and scorecards and tier lists and stuff. There's a lot of division about opinions on this raid, which is surprising, right? So I thought I'd break down boss by boss, looking at it from a perspective you may not have seen, because I'm a weird player. I like hardcore stuff and I like casual stuff. I like endgame and I like old, dusty old content. I like gold making and crafting, and I really like the lore. So to me, a good raid boss not only is mechanically satisfying, it's got to be thematically satisfying. Preferably, it has a good place in the lore, and of course, you gotta have some good drops. A really good example of this, I think, of course, is Arthas, the Lich King. Not the Shadowlands version, no, back in Wrath of the Lich King. You spent the whole expansion with Arthas up in your grill. You knew what was gonna happen in Icecrown Citadel long before you got there. And the whole thing just, it has a lot of pomp and circumstance to it because it deserves to. And Blizzard desperately wants to recapture that with bosses. They can't always do it when they don't have characters that have been around for a couple of decades, right? They've got to let some of these guys live. However, the interesting thing about this raid is we're kind of digging into Deathwing, Neltharion's past, and so with all the Shadowflame thematics, I think you can see why I would rate this raid very highly. Mechanically, there were some stinkers, and there were some very satisfying fights too. So, let's get into it, starting with Khazara. Now, Khazara is a first boss. I think this boss gives you everything that a first boss could give you, right? At all levels of difficulty, it's pretty straightforward, and it's a banger. She comes out loud and proud, big spell effects, big sound effects, and my favorite thing, it's a classic dragon fight. Her face is the place you want to avoid, is dangerous. She has AoE effects that pulse out of her, kind of like Flame Buffet used to. It really felt like an old school dragon fight. And then dealing with the pools and the lasers is of course kind of the new twist. I think after having done it on Mythic with the pool placement, having to do it in a very structured way, that was a pretty satisfying fight. Keeping in mind it is a first boss of the raid, right? So I'm willing to give it an A for its mechanics. I also think thematically Khazara was perfect, right? I mean, look at her. She's a prototype for Deathwing, so she's got that armor fused onto her, the Elementium plates. We had the fantastic Shadow Flame effects. And what I really like, too, is her vocals actually remind me of the Sindragosa fight, right? And Sindragosa was another one of my all-time favorite fights. Even though we're talking fire and ice, I think just it gives a similar vibe, this angry dragon lady who's out to get you. So I'm going to give it an A. The loot, and remember, we're considering a first boss. I actually think the loot is pretty good, maybe even too good. I don't know if you've experienced this in any pug raids, but a lot of people like to come in for just Khazara, for just that one trinket, and then they bail. They go join some other group, probably that's doing just Sarkareth at the end or something like that. So overall, I think the loot it's a first boss, it's lower item level. I also want to give credit basically to all of the bosses because of the change made a little later in the patch, making the Mythic track from Mythic raid bosses. That really solved a lot of the weirdness with the itemization. Initially, that kind of did screw up Khazara's loot, but later it was fixed, so I'll give credit for that. It's an A. And then the lore. Khazara's a really cool idea. I wish that we had seen Khazara in the story campaign somewhere or something, right? And this is an idea we're going to come back to a couple of times here. With the Aberrus campaign, the story quests, they kind of fell flat for me, at least, and a lot of folks. I will say they got a lot of the main characters involved. However, as we're looking through this boss list, we're going to judge whether or not the quest team knew what the raid team was doing. And in Kazara's case, I do not think they did. And I think this is a big missed opportunity. There could have been, even just in like a lore text or something, right? It's such a cool idea, but it was never introduced outside of the raid. So I gotta take points away for that. So overall, an A, an A, an A. You know, I'll actually bring A down to A minus, just because, again, before they adjusted the mythic track, the loot off Kazara's little sketch. But overall, I would say, for a first boss, this is an A minus. Amalgamation. So Amalgamation is a debuff switch fight, right? You have the two adds, and then they merge into a one add. And it definitely kind of reminded me of like the Elemental Council from Bastion of Twilight is the one that I remember. There's been many fights like it, though. I think going all the way back to Classic, there were switch fights. I think AQ had one. Mechanically, though, again, like second boss, I thought it was pretty satisfying. I do think now, over time, the meta of tanks swapping the bosses rather than having everyone run side to side is better, and it's more skillful, but a lot of tanks struggle with it. So I've heard a lot of people say the default strategy is to do the side switching and not the tank switching. I don't understand that. Tank switching just makes so much more sense. Overall, though, I don't have any pain points about Amalgamation. It felt good. It wasn't too easy. It wasn't too hard. For the position in the raid, it's an A. Thematics. So again, we have the Shadow Flame. We have Neltharion introducing the power of Shadow and Flame. You know, explaining how he mixed them. That's pretty cool. I think visually the fight looks okay. It definitely is, you know, a Shadow Flame elemental, so he does two things, Shadow and Flame. Overall, the thematics were pretty good, though. They fit the raid. Just something doesn't quite... it's not as much of a loud and proud banger as Kazara was, you know? At least for me. I'm going to give it an A minus. The loot. You know... I'm trying to avoid the discussion about trinkets and very rares, you know? I think there's a lot that could be said there. I'll just say that I like very rare items. I think they're fine. I'm not worried about their impact on the competitive sphere. I don't think everyone needs a snowflake special treatment where they get the exact same treasures as every other player does, right? It's a really weird perspective to me. Loot is always RNG. It's always a gamble. I think a good loot system has lots of items that are good enough, right? You don't have to obsess over BIS, because it's not like the gap between BIS and second BIS and third BIS is really that huge. Of course, there can be different, especially for trinkets, there can be different items. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent here. Amalgamation and the trinket that I got, the Elementium Anvil, it's so good. So I'm biased here. It has to be an A for me, because just the way it works with Ret is really interesting, but I know for a lot of classes it's not as good a trinket. Still, when you get that run-in, especially like take that into a dungeon, for me, that piece of loot makes me think of the boss, right? Though just the way it works, too. Everything about it. Now the lore. I'm gonna give it I'll give it a little more than Kazara. I'll give it a C+, just because there was a lot of Shadow Flame experiments being done out there in Zaralek Caverns, right? That's part of the story campaign, it's part of what happens with Farak, so I would say the lore was a little better for Amalgamation. Overall, looks like this one's going to land at another A-. Alright, Forgotten Experiments. Mechanically, so it's a weird way of doing a council boss, is the way I've heard it described. So heroic and below, it's just, you know, boss after boss after boss. And then mythic, you start getting these crazy overlaps. Just a little interesting, but for the most part, it didn't seem too difficult. The tank swap actually is one of my favorite parts of the fight, the way that debuff worked, where you just get this stacking buff, and then the other guy has to get the stacking buff, and then you gotta touch the other tank, and it makes an explosion on you. I thought that was cool. The deep breath, kind of cool. This wasn't a super intensive fight, though. Still, I don't have any major problems. Even the bouncy ball thing that gives the last boss a shield, never really an issue. I thought it would be more annoying than it was. I'll go ahead and give this fight an A-. I will say I'd rather just do a council fight than have them try and fake it the way they did for Mythic Experiments. Thematics, A+. So, Forgotten Experiments helps bridge the gap. They're the missing link between Neltharion doing creepy stuff and having the Drakthir, who seems to be a pretty noble idea, at least, from the start, before he got afraid of something. Anyway, I like the fact that these guys, like, crash out of the tubes they're in, right? You have the introduction, so you have Zaskarn kind of explaining who they are and what they are. I thought that was all really just well done. For the loot, this is another one where it's like, yeah, very rare trinkets can be a little weird sometimes, right? I'm gonna go ahead and give it an A-. I think for its position in the raid, its loot is appropriate. I don't feel like people are super compelled to go do the boss. Actually, I'll bring it down to a B+, honestly, because I don't feel like people are super compelled to do the boss unless they really, really want that chromatic essence. That's basically the only reason to go that far and not just do the skip. Lore, I'm going to give this one, this feels like a B to me. It was implied that there were experiments going on. Yeah, you know, I'm going to upgrade this one to an A-. Just because if you actually did a lot of the quests in Zarelek Caverns and you read a lot of the flavor text, there's lore items out there where they have, you may not know this, but a lot of the sulfur grounds in the area around the tower in the middle was like a dumping grounds for Drakthir experiment corpses, and they were called experiment number whatever, just like the bosses in this raid. So I would say actually the Forgotten Experiments has a fairly strong foundation in lore compared to the other two bosses. We didn't know specifically about those guys, that's why I'm not giving it a full A or an A+. They were kind of, it was more vague, right? But they are the Forgotten Experiments, so I guess that's the idea. Overall, yeah, that's looking like Forgotten Experiments got an A- again. Interesting. I have a very interesting rating system. Oh, but here we'll have some variety now. So, Zakali Assault. Oh, I mean, I'm okay with a cleave fight. I like having, like, remember the bug fight from Nyalotha, the, like, really swarmy fight? I like having cleave fights sometimes. This fight's way too annoying, though, right? Like, one mismanaged ad and you wipe. Yeah, your tanks shouldn't miss, and some range should tag the ads, but honestly, I think we've all wiped on Assault of the Zakali and been like, what am I doing with my life? You know what I mean? It just wasn't good. And then the stack, you know, for the boss phase, stacking at the door. I guess there's a little bit of something there, but they could have made a better fight without any of the ads based around the boss attacking the door, and I think it would have been better. And then there's the whole idea that you can just cheese it and blast him through to skip the ad phase entirely, and that's what a lot of people do if they overgear it. So, overall, we get a D- on the mechanics of Assault of the Zakali. The only points it's getting for is, again, I think if you made a fight about the boss attacking the door, maybe that would have been a better fight, and you could have, you know, had a better fight. Now, Thematics, I'm actually going to give it a B. It is a kind of cool idea, you know, we're overlooking Zarelek Caverns, and, like, these bad guys are climbing up the walls, right? It's supposed to feel like you're looking down and seeing there like caverns, except the problem is the area that they put that looking down, you know, the raid has this open space around it that has nothing going on in it. It didn't feel like you were looking down on like the questing area. It felt like you were looking down on the background area that most people probably never go to unless they're like mining or something. So wasn't the best, but there was an idea. There was an attempt. The thematics are okay, so we'll go with a B- here. The loot, not great, right? The one thing I do like is the random recipe drop to kind of get some of the old recipes still in circulation for crafters. I thought that was a good idea. I'm not sure that was the best way to do it, but I'm glad that in particular was there. You know, sometimes I ran Aberrus as a money-making venture. You just spam it on LFR, get your runes from the bag for queuing as a tank or a healer, and then get some Shadow Flame Essence, get some recipes and VOEs, right? But I would not say the loot on Assault is particularly compelling. Honestly, it's like a roadblock before Rashok, which does actually have loot that people want, right? The lore, the Assault of the Sakali. So we're gonna go ahead and give it like a B- for lore. I think it was a big part of the story, right? That, you know, these Sakali elders were waking up, they were being kidnapped by Neltharion. All of that lore was pretty cool, and it's even explored in the after quest when you go with Raytheon and Sibelian to go like clean up and do the kind of prologue. So again, I think it kind of fits with the thematics. It made sense that this was happening, even though the fight itself was kind of just not very fun. So overall, Assault of the Sakali is a C. It's definitely not the worst fight. It's not annoying. It's not egregious. There weren't any insane balance changes that screwed people over. Nothing like that, right? But we could do better. Let's go with C-, actually. Yeah. Alright. Rashok. A+. Rashok, that's what a raid boss is supposed to be, right? He's, again, he had that thing that Kazara had too. I'm going to give him an A+ for thematics as well, because he was loud and proud, right? And I actually play with in-game sound on. A lot of times I find it easier to react to boss stuff, boss lines, rather than like some stupid horn or warning from an add-on. So I got used to, for example, Rashok goes, and you know he's about to mess you up, right? You know those tanks need to do their tank swap, and often they don't because they're spacing out and they probably don't have in-game sound on. I think the thematics of Rashok justify having in-game sound on, and it would make you a better player. A+. The loot, A. Rashok's loot is good, right? You've got your tier, you've got your Rashok's Molten Heart, you got the named weapons with the procs. I think there's a lot of cool loot, and it's thematic. It fits him, right? You're getting his spear. Oh man, Rashok. The worst part about Rashok was he should have been done on Magmarax's platform, right? That he should have been later in the raid. And the lore, A+. We knew they were looking for their elders. If you counted, you knew that there was one missing. And in fact, there's still one out there that I think we're going to deal with in 10.2. Overall, and you know what's really great about that? They get another chance. They get another chance to do another Rashok because of, what's her name? I think Agira? The one who's associated with the Farak assaults, right? That's a Zakali Elder that's still out there. So I think this one's safe. A+. Who doesn't like Rashok? Zed Skarn. Oh boy. So, playing this fight out outside of Mythic difficulty, it's a fine fight. It's okay. right? It does what it needs to do. It's pepperoni pizza fight. Mostly it's an rage timer that people just destroy now anyway, so you don't even really get to play the fight where you felt squeezed in, because you just beat the timer. And that's the WoW metagame, right? Sometimes the safest way to play is do more damage. And then there was the cheese, and the cheese spot, and how that all evolved, and then the nerf to the cheese spot, which then blocked guild's progress. And I will say I liked the idea of, like, the bomb. I like when there's a bomb job. I like when you need a job doer. You know, like you get a hunter, a rogue, or a monk, someone flippy dippy, and they just run around and do stuff as opposed to doing the fight. I think that's good. I actually think the game would be better if they codified that into more standard mechanics. Like, what if disarm trap was actually a mechanic, and like agility DPS learned that, or like could pick that in their talent tree the same way you could pick a crowd control. You know, I think there's a lot of room to add utilities like that a lot of meat-headed power gamers would oppose, but meat-headed power gamers need to be told to shut the fuck up more often. So, all in all, Zedskarn had potential to be one of those cool job doer fights, but it wasn't, right? It wasn't. I'm gonna give it a C+. It was marginally better than Assault of the Zakali. And the idea was there. They had that map that kind of reminded you of the Painsmith map, right? The boss area was really cool. And so I actually will give him a strong scoring for Thematics, because I think really he was there the whole time. He's like this engineer guy. His battle arena is like this crazy trap-laden area. It made sense. It made more sense than Painsmith did, honestly. Loot, well, maybe someone will correct me in the comments on this, but Zedskarn's loot I didn't find particularly compelling, and I've run it on a lot of characters. I think he has some trinkets that are nice for, I think my rogue has that trinket, but overall, the loot, not bad, but not compelling, especially for his position in the raid. You'd think some of the nicer items would be there, but they're just not. Lore. Okay, I'm gonna put him in the C bucket, because Zedskarn absolutely should have appeared in the story campaign. How was he not in Zaralek Caverns doing stuff? Like, especially the way he acts. He's like part of the facility. He's clearly loyal to the Echo of Neltharion. He's clearly chosen to be in cahoots with Sarkareth. Where was Zedskarn in the quests and the campaign? So the question is, did the quest designers know what the raid designers were doing? And I would say no, absolutely not. And Zedskarn's more important than Kazara or Amalgamation, so I'm actually going to give him a lower score for missing this. Alright, so how would we average this one out? Probably looks like a B-. He could have been better. He could have been worse. Alright, Magmarax. So, this one's an interesting one too, because some people don't like the idea of an actual patchwork boss, where there's not a lot of hard mechanics, you don't need 50 add-ons telling you timers for this or that. It's an extremely straightforward fight that, upon its release at least, had a fairly tight enrage timer. Right? For the gear score we were going into Magmarax with, it was, you didn't have anything to do except stand in DPS, because you had to. If you did anything else, you might not meet the enrage. So I thought, I like that, and I wish they would go more into that, but I think Blizzard would not be able to capably pick. I don't know I don't know how good they'd be at picking a true hard enrage timer. We haven't seen a lot of those lately, and when they are, like, they're there, but they're super generous. You'll almost never run into them, right? So it wasn't a mechanically challenging or satisfying fight, it was a patchwork, and that used to mean something, so I do want to give it some points for that. That said, it wasn't the most compelling fight, was it? Not really, so C+, I think, is fair. Thematics, I'm gonna go with C+ again. I mean, it's kind of cool, like, okay, so think about we're descending into Aberrus, which is kind of like descending into the underworld, descending into hell, right? And who guards the gates of the underworld in mythology? You have Cerberus, right? You have the three-headed necro dog. So Magmarax is kind of like that, but also, why wasn't Magmarax a Shadow Flame Hydra? Like, why was he just fire? Right? And then also, why wasn't it mentioned ever? So the only cool thing about it is, and I'll give Blizzard credit for this, they said the area was just that part of the map, the area was so cool that it begged for a boss. Originally there wasn't even going to be a boss there, I guess. It would have been like a trash thing. But basically that's all he is, right? Magmarax is a big trash mob. The loot, I didn't find it particularly compelling either. And this is quite a later boss fight, right? I can't think of anything. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, he drops tier and like standard item level stuff, but his loot didn't even really feel special. Yeah. And the lore, there's not even any, like, Hydras aren't even a common monster in Zaralek Caverns. It doesn't make a lot of sense that thing was even there, honestly and truly. Yeah. So, it's funny, I was like, I don't mind Magmarax, I didn't think it was that bad. He's getting a pretty bad score here, right? It's like a C-. Yeah, we'll give him a C-. We could make an argument for D+, but let's leave him at a C-. Alright, Echo of Neltharion. I love this fight. I love this fight so much. The way that Neltharion is built as a raid boss, just being like a big two-handed swing guy, is perfect, right? Like, we weren't fighting the dragon, Deathwing. We were fighting his visage, his echo. And he uses the sword you're gonna get, he's wearing the armor you're gonna get, and then the way the rock walls work, where you have to bash your way through them, they block line of sight, he's got all these patterns, it makes sense that he can do this. That was totally cool, how it showed the two sides of the Earth Warder, right? He had his earthy powers, and then, well, deep in the earth, deep in the dark earth, you have the Void. He had his shadow powers as well. Having to hide in the portals, the thing with the mind control where you can hit the ad. For me, Neltharion could have been the end boss. He hit it. He hit it better than Sarkareth did in Thematics too, in my opinion. Although Sarkareth, the boss itself is not why Sarkareth is cool. The room is why Sarkareth is cool, right? Now, Therion, the room is okay. There's some painting on the walls and all that, but, you know, even just the way, thematically, he led you through the whole raid. He was teasing Raytheon and Sibelian and trying to pit them against each other. And by the end, the jig was up. We figured it out, right? I just thought that was just so well executed. And on top of that, well, we'll get to that in the lore section, but the loot. So, listen, I love the sword. And the class trinkets, you know, they needed some tuning, but they ended up pretty good. He's the penultimate boss in the raid, so his loot should be good, and it is. I am compelled to go kill Neltharion on all of my characters on whatever difficulty they can do. And the lore. So, I'm going to give it an A. I wish I could give it an A+. It's an A+ if you actually did your quests and read them and did Lore Master. So there were a lot. I knew early on that we were going to have Deathwing. I actually thought, my theory was that Deathwing was still around as like a lava slime. He was going to be a pile of magma that he didn't actually die when we killed him. He got sucked into the earth, and turns out he's in the Dragon Isles. Nope, that's not what happened. But I was close, because there's a quest line out there in Onaran Plains, kind of the north end, where you encounter some Drakthir who are just like going insane because they found this stone, this void stone that whispers to them, and it says it's Neltharion, and it's telling them to go underground. And you see this lore played out in a few different places across the Dragon Isles in the base patch. So Blizzard did a really, really, really good job of choreographing what was coming. The lore made sense. And really, what did we find out about Neltharion? The Echo of Neltharion was in fact a faceless one. A minion a minion of some old god that we may not know, or some void lord that we can't identify, which has greater implications for the lore as a whole. So for me personally, Echo of Neltharion was the perfect raid fight. That's what's supposed to happen in a raid. From the lead up and the build up, from the loot, the mechanics, the way the boss operates, the way you get his cool armor and weapon as a transmog. Oh, perfect. A+ for Echo of Neltharion. Alright, last but not least, we have Sarky. Sarky Warky. This is an interesting fight. It's a short end boss. I don't know if I share the sentiment that I love short end bosses all the time, but at least having variety, having it be a possibility, is something I'm definitely interested in. So I'm okay with it being a shorter boss. And it is weird how the boss works, like, you know, there's just some interesting things about the boss. I will say it's a little scuffed that once you understand the pillars placement, it seems like you can trivialize the fight, and I wonder if that was intended or if that was an oversight. Because the fight is so much harder if you try to put the pillars all over the place, right? But if you just put them back in the starting spot, that whole explosion phase is easy. I liked going underground. I liked that there was a buff, a compensatory buff. So job doers, again, I remember I said I like fights with job doers. Well, I like that someone goes, picks up the bomb, goes downstairs, grabs a bunch of things, gets a huge haste buff, and comes upstairs and blasts. That's awesome. I do think having that pivotal moment in the world first kill as well, where it was just like, hey, we're all going down nuts. Let's go get a haste buff and really blast, right? That is, again, sometimes a problem World of Warcraft runs into, where the safest things to do is blast harder. Still, I thought Sarkareth was a mechanically satisfying fight. I even like that people die to cleave. I like it, because I think a lot of people have gotten complacent. Tanks are way too willing to face mobs at melee DPS, as if they don't understand what parries are. So, I like this. This feels good fundamental WoW, but if you put Sarkareth in front of Neltharion and made Echo of Neltharion the last boss, I wouldn't have been mad. So I'm only going to give him an A. I actually think, you know, if we beat Sarkareth in the Neltharion room, and he was a simpler fight, and then we fought Echo of Neltharion, a version of that for the end boss, that could have been really satisfying too. Thematics. So I'll give Sarkareth another A+ here. The way the fight evolves, right, and you see the void take him and turn him into something else. Crazy, right? And the way the room with the beautiful room and the stained glass windows blowing out, showing you that cosmic void. Just the whole way that, and the implications, right? The lore implications of the chains and what what was Neltharion doing down there? We still don't really actually know. So thematically, as a final boss room, I think really carries it. Sarkareth himself, I mean, he did the Drakthir evoker things, right? He's got his deep breath, and he's got his oppressing howl, and his fire breath, and he does his pyre, right? He was literally just a devastation evoker with some void stuff coming in. It was cool enough, but I think he's really carried by the room and the implications of the overall situation. Loot for an end boss. I'm gonna give him an A+. So Sarkareth's loot was so good, and keeping in mind we're in this modern loot system as well. There's the quest to kill Sarkareth at the end of the campaign where you get some gear out of that. There's the Void-Touched Curio, so you got a custom tier piece. And then of course there's the really cool trinkets and other gear. I thought Sarkareth's loot was good. It's really disappointing when an end boss loot is not good, but this time around it was pretty good. And the lore, I mean, the question we ask is, does the boss have any substantial story, and does it justify its raid experience? I mean, we've known this has been coming for a while. The 10.7 patch set us up to know, hey, Sarkareth's going downstairs, and we followed him. We had a little bit of a chase. I thought that was okay. It's not like the story was fantastic itself about Sarkareth, but I think the way it plugged into the other Drakthir, and in some ways even like Abyssian and that whole angle, right? So I will take the plus away though, just because I think, like I said, I feel like the implication was that the Echo of Neltharion was the one in control of the puppet strings, right? He was the one that we're calling out, whispering, bringing the Drakthir down below, and it, to me, would have made more sense if Sarkareth and Neltharion switched places, at least from a lore perspective, right? So we'll even out Sarkareth at an A. Alright, so, like I said at the start, I really do like this raid, I do. Now, there's clearly a couple of bosses that you could cut out that would make the experience better, right? So imagine an Aberrus that didn't have these bosses. And that's why I think Aberrus may actually be one of the best raids they've ever made at every difficulty level. As you can see, I enjoyed the mechanics, I enjoyed the thematics, the loot was compelling, the lore was hit and miss, but when it hit, it did hit. Some of that stuff was really cool, but it definitely did feel like maybe the quest team and the raid team needed to meet a little more often, because I just didn't like the Zaralek Cavern story campaign. The parts I did like were represented in the raid, but I would have much rather seen, for example, why was it Farak who toasted Loam? Why didn't they have Kazara do that? And then we would have gone and killed Kazara, right? There's so many things they could have done better there. Now, I know, out there, there's different kinds of players. Some of you only care about the endgame mechanics. Some of you are parse lords and you only care about the loot. Some of you are old school players or casual players. You actually care about the lore more than anything else. So I thought it'd be interesting to rate the raid overall on these topics. That's about a 40-minute video. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed it. I guess we'll wrap it up here. Overall, I think we could say my rating of Aberrus was an A. It's a pretty good raid. It's not perfect, but better than we got in Shadowlands, right? Alright, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you do, let me know with a like and subscribe, a comment, let me know what you think if you spent this long listening to me talk. Again, my name is Darkscream. Thanks for watching. Peace.